Time, and I call the honourable member for Lawler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I welcome the opportunity to speak on the Enhancing Online Safety for Children Bill 2014. Obviously, it deals with an issue, the issue of bullying that is endemic, perhaps has always been endemic in our society, particularly amongst young people, and obviously is something that I spent an inordinate amount of time dealing with in my work in schools. I'd like to suggest, in fact, that I think that the bill has captured some of the learning that has been going on in the education sector over perhaps the last decade in some of its content, and certainly in Labor supports this bill and the introduction of an e-commissioner to put into place some of the ideas that are already in place in schools within our communities. Deputy Speaker, we've all read the headlines, and we can all relay the high-profile stories where bullying and its modern iteration, cyberbullying, has led to tragic results. But in the real world, in our schools and in our communities, the impact of bullying, real or cyber, has no celebrity status. And when I say real, I mean, of course, in real time rather than on the internet. This is happening every day in all of our communities, in schools, in workplaces, in the community, and tragically for some, in the home. As a teacher and principal, of course, I was trained to deal with real-time bullying. As a profession, we had to adapt quickly, however, as cyberbullying emerged. And in terms of that training that I received many years ago as a student at university studying teaching, it's true to say that teachers learn most of the strategies around protecting children and working with children to create preventative and protective behaviours on the job. And I would say that that was true in my case and for most of the teachers I worked with. And we do that collectively and collegiately, supporting one another to come up with creative and sensitive ways of dealing with issues that can result, as we've seen in recent times, with tragic consequences. And like most in the chamber, we have been swept up, so to speak, by the disruption that is our digital technologies coming quickly down the line and into our lives. As a mother, I had 3 teenagers using MySpace. If anyone remembers MySpace, it's only, 8 years ago, but it's gone into the dim, dark past now, been overtaken by other platforms. And like parents across the country, I had to establish acceptable practices in my home around my children's use of the internet and, at the time, the dreaded MySpace. And I dare say, like parents and teachers across the country, I had my share of times when I was counselling the victim and other times when I was dealing with the bully. I hope in the process I was educating both in protective and preventative behaviours, creating awareness, but making sure people understood the hurt and the damage that bullying causes. The schools I was working in, Deputy Speaker, we too began to have those conversations with students as issues emerged. Firstly, from students interacting with social media from their homes, and later with the wide use of smartphones whilst at school. We were dealing with new forms of interaction. The rude message was no longer left on the locker or scrawled in an alley on the way to school for all to see, but posted and available for the world to see. We were dealing with this on the ground as the technologies emerged. Responsive schools and communities were educating families about the dangers of online use and about monitoring online behaviour. But the pace of change increased incredibly rapidly. In the space of 6 months in schools, we went from debating whether to ban mobile phones in classrooms, firstly in response to the concerns students would be distracted by making and taking calls and text messages in class, to managing something so much bigger. Upon returning after a Christmas break, we found completely new issues for us to deal with. Those lovely new smartphone Christmas presents meant we were now faced the proliferation of social media being used during school hours. The new protocols we'd put in place the year prior were quickly out of date, Digital disruption happens at a rapid pace. The best plans were disrupted by emerging technologies in nanoseconds. The debate back then about mobile phones, there were two schools of thought. Some people wanted to ban them outright. Others wanted to accommodate the new technology and apply standards and protocols to their use. These were intense debates around mobile phones, so you can only imagine the debates increasing in energy as we moved to smartphones. My personal view, Deputy Speaker, was that we could use the school-wide debate about mobile phones as a vehicle for renewed discussion about good manners. As that became a debate about social media and it being used in negative ways, my personal view was that we could use the debate around the use of smartphones and the use of social media platforms for a conversation about bullying. And I think it's fair to say that that is what occurred across our nation. It was important, I think, that as a country, as schools, as families, as communities and as a country, we saw it as an opportunity, not just as a challenge. The new debate emerged, of course, and change agents in education were publishing useful ways to harness smartphones for learning. Cutting-edge schools were introducing social media into classrooms to stay ahead of that curve, and in doing so, implemented programs to ensure responsible use of the internet. The education sector responded generally with positive plans for educating their communities on the value and the potential of the new platforms, as well as the dangers and what was acceptable behaviour from the keyboard. Like all change, new challenges and opportunities emerged. The challenges around the 24/7 nature of social media are real, but as a society we have responded, and we're here today as a federal government responding. In schools, it was certainly a blessing that the laws referenced by the member for Ryan in her contribution, those laws were a blessing because they already existed, because use of telecommunications for bullying, for harassment, were already in place. And in my experience, they were incredibly useful in working through issues with parents and students, because the knowledge that things were illegal certainly assisted parents and students to come to grips with the severity of those behaviours, and attitudes certainly changed quickly once people realised that what they were doing was illegal and that there were consequences. But of course, dealing with this issue is best done in a preventative way, and that is to educate our community in responsible use. Schools were very quick to bring those policies and practices into cultures. And we were fortunate in introducing new technologies on a large scale in this country and in a planned way through the digital education program. This meant that schools prepared the ground by involving parents in, generally speaking, in multiple contacts with the school, involving parents and students in those contacts, in cyberbullying and awareness training programs. We held them for teachers, we held them for parents, and we held them for students as part of our implementation programs. And I think this actually added to broader community awareness about the issues that were occurring in cyberspace. But it also provided an opportunity for the whole school and community discussion about acceptable pro-social behaviours. In fact, in many schools, as we heard the member for Bendigo outline, in many schools, students were actually involved in designing those awareness campaigns themselves, and strategies were embedded into the curriculum as well as into the culture. And it brought the issue of bullying to the forefront again in our classrooms and in our communities. And it allowed us to highlight the hurt and damage that ensues when someone is systematically bullied. In many schools, restorative justice practices were used, and there was a lot of learning happening for teachers around the power of restorative justice practices, where those hurt are acknowledged, where the victim is heard and empowered, where the bully comes to an understanding of the consequences of their actions for themselves as well as for the person that they have been bullying, where the bully is called to account and has to make amends. These were important parts of the learning culture that was happening in schools as this digital disruption grew. But of course, Deputy Speaker, this is an ongoing issue. New platforms emerge and vast numbers of users mean that systems need to be developed to ensure that offensive material is removed as quickly as possible. I welcome the concession this week from Twitter that they'd been lax in dealing with trolls, of course the new term for a cyberbully. This concession is hopefully a sign that the digital company will follow up with planning and action to correct this, and perhaps this legislation going through could urge them to do that more quickly than they might have previously. And hopefully they will engage meaningfully in an ongoing way with the E-Commissioner to ensure that we're in a position to respond quickly as new platforms continue to emerge. Deputy Speaker, Labor is supporting this bill because, as the member for Ryan so carefully explained, there's been a long commitment, a long bipartisan commitment dating back to the Labor government, and a very careful consultative process has taken place. In government, we endorsed and responded to recommendations to come out of those committees, and in opposition today, we support the bill that is enacting some of those recommendations. Labor has consistently called for detailed industry and community consultation on these proposals. We've facilitated community input on the legislation by referring the bill to a Senate committee, and are pleased to see that the amendment, particularly one around a review process, has been put in place. However, there's still work to be done outside of this bill as a community going forward. One area that I would like to see, or like to hope, is that our media outlets continue to create awareness in the community, not through not so much through front page stories about bullying as a sensational story, but more about ensuring that parents are aware, and as a community we're aware of the new platforms that are emerging, because as a former teacher I can certainly inform the House, and certainly would inform the House, that our children are much quicker at finding new platforms and can often be involved in whole spaces on the internet before parents, schools and the rest of us are concerned. And I think the media has a role to play there in ensuring that we're all aware of what's coming next and what our children are involved in. Deputy Speaker, the establishment of a Children's E-Safety Commissioner is a step in the right direction, assuming, of course, that the Commissioner is properly resourced and can act in a timely way, and, of course, trying to do something across the whole country may reduce the capacity of this to occur quickly. So setting up systems into the future, I would suggest, would be a timely thing. Delays, of course, can be very dangerous. We need to ensure the Commissioner's powers are real, they're effective, and that they're kept up to date. Most importantly, that they are reviewed and kept up to date. I welcome the inclusion of a review built into this legislation, as I said. Most of the speakers in the chamber this morning have mentioned the damning statistics of 1 in 5 children suggesting that they have been bullied between the ages of 10 and 17, have been cyberbullied, and we know that it significantly goes unreported, so we need to continue to monitor that figure to ensure that our practices are helping to prevent those behaviours. We need to continue the conversation started at dinner tables, in classrooms and boardrooms across the country about building supportive pro-social communities. We need to use the challenges our emerging technologies bring to present as opportunities to address social issues that have always existed but are finding new platforms. Deputy Speaker, Labor believes we must do all we can to tackle bullying in our classrooms, in our homes, in our workplaces, and we welcome this legislation as a step toward that. I look forward to working with others in the Parliament as we continue progress in this area, Deputy Speaker. Thank you.